I am going to introduce our moderator, Stamos Venios, co-founder, Data Elite.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I guess you can. So I am the co-founder and managing director of Data Elite. We are an early stage VC that we're focusing exclusively in big data. I've had the pleasure of working with some of the greatest big data scientists that are out there. I can introduce them. So we have Jerome from Riot Games, Eric Colson from Stitch Fix, Bert from France, and Jeff Magson from Netflix. We want to talk about some of the interesting problems we've seen the past years in our science and what we think this is going to go forward with. From an investment standpoint, we've seen a lot of companies that are working on, we see a shift from the infrastructure to the application layer. So I want to ask, what do you think? Is this the future, and why are more and more companies working towards the application rather than the infrastructure we see a few years back? So, Jerome, if you want to.
So what we are seeing is a shift between companies that are building the infrastructure and companies that are offering a service on top of those infrastructure. And I think that's where we want to be in a couple of years from now. That's where we are going to be. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done before we get there, but we tend to see a lot of startups basically providing services on top of the infrastructure. So almost everybody should be able at one point to use big data.
Just to add to that, I'm former vice president of data science at Netflix, and I'm now with a smaller startup called Stitch Fix. When I was at Netflix, I would say about 70% of my team's resources went towards infrastructure as opposed to application, meaning they're just getting the data to flow, but they're not necessarily doing anything smart with it. It's just existing at that point. And there's still a huge hurdle to get over there, right? We need to make it easier. But the value comes when you shift to application, you start using it in some way. And that weight that I put, 70% of the resources are going towards infrastructure, is beginning to shift as things become more manageable, the technology catches up, and people can start to put their energy towards application. And that's the part that's exciting to me. At this newer startup called Stitch Fix, we spend almost 95% of our time on application because the data is small and manageable. So as the big data also becomes small and manageable relatively due to technology, I think we'll see that shift, and that's where the value comes from.
I think what you're seeing is the pretty natural cycle in IT that's taken place over the last 30 years I've been doing this, which is you get a great stack, you build on top of that, the applications mature, and then new demands come in, and it requires rethinking the entire infrastructure. If you look at big data as it started 8 years ago with the needs of Google and Yahoo, that technology's finally trickled down in the forms of MapReduce platforms that are getting mass adoption at high levels. The next cycle we're seeing in that is actually a blend of what we're calling complex data to be able to fulfill these applications that require extremely complex, very diverse data sources, things that are today unstructured data, which needs to be processed into structured data before any of us can manipulate and work with it. 80% of all data today is unstructured. So the tools are coming along that require us to be able to process those and build the application layer on top of that. And this cycle has built up with the maturity. I think you'll see the next turn that comes from the view of what the big providers are doing today, Microsoft, Google, they're all building semantic infrastructures to be able to understand concept and context. That's their next wave, and you're going to see that technology trickle down. In fact, that's where this company, Franz, has invested its efforts.
So I think the shift between infrastructure to application layer is partially just because over the last couple of years we've seen Hadoop evolve into something that was rapidly changing and new versions coming out that break APIs into something that has stabilized to the point where it becomes a lot more viable to concentrate on building a rich application layer that isn't going to necessarily change or break, as the infrastructure evolves underneath it. And so, as with any new disruptive technology, initially you see, this rapid innovation on, the lower, more base levels, right? And that prevents things higher up the stack from really evolving or becoming, commercialized.
So Jeff, do you think there's enough companies that are dealing with infrastructure, so there's not a need for startups to get into that space? Or is it more of a challenging problem that not a lot of engineers are capable of addressing?
I think large-scale Hadoop deployments or big data deployments still require a lot of infrastructure expertise within organizations. What we see, fairly recently is some companies like Qubel and others that start offering infrastructure as a service, right? And so they make it really easy to plug in and use things. But as your data needs scale out and you become, like Netflix scale, it becomes really hard to use those as a service sort of providers, right? So you still need expertise in-house to run extremely large-scale deployments. And so, as that innovates and people grow bigger and bigger data, being able to scale out and just, use that out of the box, like a clean API, kind of what Jerome was talking about earlier, becomes more and more important and more valuable because then we can concentrate on building applications on top.
Okay. So Bert, do you want to?
Yeah, so certainly one of the drivers that I think is just coming online is the Internet of Things. You look at devices. The last team up here was talking about medical devices and the amount of information that gets generated off of just a single device. If it's your refrigerator, if it's, a special device you're wearing because you've got diabetes and you want to track glucose, that whole wave is coming. GE is investing, 1,000 people here in the Valley, specifically around the industrial side of the Internet of Things and being able to digest that information. We need to fold that information in. The same thing is true in healthcare. I'm working on a project with Yeshiva University in New York City, and we're having to blend clinical devices in there, and they're generating huge amounts of information. So the infrastructure is still needs to grow tremendously, and at the same time, we got to keep the apps moving as fast as possible.
Eric, you want to take on that?
Just more of the same. I do think there's a huge evolution ahead of us as the infrastructure becomes very manageable. Now we can get our hands on this stuff. I think the statistical learning and machine learning techniques that we know today will continue to evolve because it's a different paradigm when you have so much data. You can find significance in the most subtlest things, and so that merits a different way of looking at things, not the same ones we've been used to for the last 10 or 15 years, but it's going to start shifting, and it's a level of sophistication that we haven't adjusted to. I mean, it's PhD level stuff that there's very few people out there that can do it effectively, and so we continue to see the shortage of the human resources on the data side. We need infrastructure may become more and more amenable, but we don't have smart people to do something fun with it.
So, I mean, the way I understand it is, and since we mentioned infrastructure, is there are multiple disciplines. We're all talking about big data and big data. What actually is big data? I mean, the infrastructure needs a completely different skill set than the analytics, than the data visualization. So what is big data that we're all into?
For me, big data is when the tools that you are currently using in production are no longer able to function. So whatever the scale is that you are using for Oracle, your database, or whatever, when you reach the point where basically you can no longer use the tools that you are using on a daily basis, then that's where big data starts. And then that could be 800 meg, a terabyte, or 5 petabyte. It doesn't matter because at one point or another, you are stopped by the existing infrastructure, and that's where basically what we call big data, and that's where we need to innovate and to push the frontier a little bit.
So, taking as an excuse, we have Jeff from Netflix and Eric from Stitch Fix. So you're basically selling movies, you're selling clothes. why do they need such an intense, such a strong big data team? Why is there do other companies need to adopt this kind of decision-making processes, if you will, or is it, how does it work?
Well, in the case of Stitch Fix, you might not know what it is. It's women's clothes, but sold algorithmically with both machine learning and expert human judgment. So the customer does not pick out her own clothes. We do that for her, and we ship it right to her. She doesn't pay for shipping in either direction. She's free to send it all back if she doesn't like it. So with that type of business model, you have to be very good at recommendations. This is our competitive barrier. We need to do this better than anyone in the world. So with that type of business model, you want to invest in eking out every ounce of information you can get your hands on. So you want to use all the data that our customers provide us, all the data we can get on our merchandise, and all the feedback data where the two intersect. And we want to leverage that to pick out very smart recommendations for our customers because we have such high penalties if we get it wrong. So that's what's driving it. And that's, that's what's driving both our machine learning side and our expert human judgments. We actually have humans that will help curate with the data so that, because the thought was, well, the machine learning and statistical learning is not enough. We need to go further. So we actually put human curators in there too that intercept this stuff and actually fix it up for the clients. But that's what's driving it. It's the business model. This is it. This is our differentiator. The clothes are not exclusive. Other vendors can offer them. So what do we do different? Well, we're going to pick them out and match them to the customer better than anyone in the world. So that's our competitive barrier, and that's what drives the use of data.
So from the movie perspective, I mean, I understand that it's easy to recommend Rambo 2, 3, and 4 if I watched one, and the same thing goes for Rocky movies. But to what extent are you guys actually, getting to understand their customer wants and needs and recommend in practice, related movies to what I liked?
So being able to collect such a rich amount of data, or a rich data set about our customers and how they're with the service really does allow us to create much better recommendations. And we've seen over the last few years, the evolution of that as we concentrated more and more on being a streaming company instead of renting DVDs. You see all kinds of new interesting interactions with the website and with streaming a movie, right? So we know what devices customers are interacting with the content on. We know when they hit pause, fast forward, rewind. We know how quickly they've consumed an entire series of content. So one thing that you heard a lot about Netflix is binge viewing, right? So you sit down and watch an entire season of House of Cards within one weekend, right? And so when a customer does that, that informs a lot that we can then pile onto new recommendations. And it's a lot of what Eric said with Stitch Fix also applies to Netflix. We want people to turn on a Netflix device and be presented with a screen full of content that they're going to love and enjoy. And we believe that that makes a really great user experience. But we've also started using big data for other things, right? So as far as what original content to produce or what content we should buy, our big data can really inform that pretty well. And also behind the scenes, we're constantly innovating the service, testing out new things, and doing that A/B testing and being able to collect all kinds of user interaction with the service allows us to make really great decisions about what features we want to roll into the product. Right? And so as far as other companies adopting big data and collecting more and more, I think that at Netflix, one of the things that we've discovered is that if we can just log as much as possible, right? So collect as much data as possible, whether or not we have a use for it currently or not, 6 months down the line, a lot of times that pays off because you find this new use for the data. And so if companies can start thinking a little more proactively, right? Like just log everything and then find a use for it, right? Rather than having a use for the data and then start logging it. I think that allows data to pay off a lot better.
Very nice. So, Bert, what part of the whole stack excites you the most? I mean, we're talking about, like Jeff said, you can leverage big data to recommend better movies, better clothes, try to understand the profile of your users. So what do you like in this whole stack?
Yeah, so I think my favorite part is the part that my customers like to spend money on because they get a big ROI on what they're spending. And to me, that is actually at that machine learning level. It's at the complex data level, being able to take and access all of the disparate data sources that they have inside their corporations. If you think about it, there's, in one case, Siemens has 35 different databases. Each individual owner of those databases doesn't want you touching their data and is not going to do anything to help you use their data. You can access it. So you have to be able to put an intelligent layer on top of that to be able to extract the information and come up with actionable business results out of that people can make decisions on. Siemens does that today across, like I said, 30 different data sets. They also access data that's completely outside of Siemens. They have geopolitical information. They want to know what the weather is in a particular area because they'll provision up, in this case, power generators based on all of the data that they can pull from outside and inside the company. So for me, it is at that very core learning level where we can help provide better decision making for them. We can do the machine learning. We can analyze the streams of data that they get in whatever unstructured form or structured form they may be, and give quick, actionable decision making to the people.
Obviously, we all know that we're producing more and more data on a daily basis. I read a report, I think it was yesterday, by 2020, we're going to have 4,500% increase in the data that are out there. So, all right, we record our data, then from what you guys are saying, it's a matter of collecting them into one place or to multiple nodes, whatever it's going to be, try to make sense out of them. So what do you think? Is there a shift towards mobile to adopt more and more big data systems and implement them at scale? Do you have, I know you have experience, Jerome, from Yahoo before, Riot Games, and other companies. So what are these guys working on? What is the most interesting problem they try to address in regards to data collection? They're being produced at some point and then they're being consumed to make a decision or to buy something or whatever it is. So how does this trail of data flowing?
So what we are seeing is a shift between batch processing to a real-time real-time processing system. So for big companies like Yahoo, Netflix, Google, the batch processing is done. We know how to do it. We know how to get data there. They pretty much all have their own way of getting the data to Hadoop. So for them, it's easy to move to the real time. For small, medium companies that are outside of big data and that want to get in, the problem is how do I get my data first? So while we are going to see Yahoo, Netflix, and all these big companies pushing is to basically move what they were doing in batch processing to the real-time side and be able to react faster, like recommendation. Well, on Netflix, when you click on something, basically they influence the next movie that gets recommended to you. So that's going to be where they're going to be working on. A lot of small, medium companies that are going to start working with big data, they are going to first try to get the data on Hadoop, and then to make sense, what do they need to do? What do they need to look at in order to make sense of the data?
So, Bert, I read a paper the other day from one of our PhD students at Stanford, and the title is "Don't Bring a Knife to a Gunfight." And basically what the professor is elaborating is basically, well, you can't compete with these guys. You can't compete with the Netflix or the Riot of the worlds if you don't leverage what you're collecting out of your users. So you are in a position that you basically have an understanding of both worlds, the business side and the product side, if you will, of big data, and also understand the machine learning and the infrastructure stuff. So do you think, first of all, that paper is correct? Do everyone need to adopt these kind of systems in order to be able to compete? Or is big data just a hype that is going to fade away?
I wouldn't consider it to be hype, but this type of cycle I have seen many, many times over the years where there's an exceptional technology that comes to the market to solve very specific problems, and over time you see the large vendors just expand the universe to incorporate that. We see it on our desktops. take what Windows used to be, and it's grown and grown and grown. There's more functionality that's in the baseline. I think that's very true of the commercial platform space. So right now, big data is called out as something special and unique because it does require special skills. You can't find the people to do that. It requires new technology, new approaches in learning. But over time, we're going to incorporate that into the stacks and vernaculars and the business problem set, and we'll move on to the next big challenge. We'll take it for granted. We'll be processing, like you said, 200 times the amount of data that we were, and we'll think nothing of it because that's what we're always doing with the stack, that's what we're doing with apps.
Mm-hmm. So I had an interesting thought when I was thinking about the future of big data. So I think of big data like the operating systems we used to have back in the day. So there were a lot of people that you need to have technical expertise in order to be able to interact with a computer, right? In some cases, this is what it is happening right now with big data. So you need really strong engineers in order to be able to extract data, collect, analyze, whatever it is. So do you think that the trends are going to be towards, if you will, democratize big data? So for example, someone who's not, I'm not such a good engineer as you are, obviously. So how can I be able to get that value out of all these systems if I don't have deep technical knowledge in that space? So what do you think of that?
I think an application layer needs to be created on top, and I think it's going to track very closely how we saw database technology evolve a long time ago, when SQL was a new language, and collecting data and being able to query it was just evolving. It required special skills as well. And if you look today, many years later, you see all kinds of GUI tools that allow you to do data extraction and analysis, right? Without requiring a specialized skill set. And we're just at that very early stage today with big data where you don't see those applications and tools that make it easy to deploy and then easy to use. But I think it's just a matter of time before those things get created, and then that does help Hadoop and big data spread outside of the valley and into less technical hands.
So, Eric, I mean, obviously you're working more in the infrastructure, more in the lower stacks, if you will, of the big data. And, going forward to what Jeff said is the future to be able to have tools that everyone can use them in order to leverage big data? And are the tools out there? I mean, I see a lot of, analytic companies, if you will, that are providing generic tools that I can basically throw in any kind of data set and extract information. Do you think that the future should be get more specific, get into certain verticals, than provide these generic tools?
That's a tough one. It's a complex answer. I do think more business user tools would be more application, like very specific scenarios where you're looking at acquisition funnel type of application that are going to be very intuitive but very specific. At the other extreme, there is the data science tools. Python, for example, is probably the most popular one today. And there is a humongous gap between them. And I think that gap will persist for quite a while. If you're going to do deep data science, you're not going to want a canned application. You're going to want Python where it's open and you can do whatever you need to do. And I don't see that gap closing for quite a while because, it's a severe one where you need to know good coding practices versus intuition of just a narrow set of things. So I see it persisting for a while, even though there's a number of companies moving into that middle space. I don't think it's going to give ground for another 5 years.
Okay. So, Jerome, what Eric described, that analytics for his company doing, basically is they understand what clothes I like, and they know that for me. Do you think ultimately, is it the dream of every big data scientist to have basically a machine learning algorithm that can basically make all the right decisions for me? So can I be eventually replaced by an algorithm that's going to make all the decisions for me, what investments I should make or how I should go from there? What do you think?
I don't think you...
sorry, obviously you're not going to get replaced because you have to build the system, but should I be looking for a job or?
I don't think that any data scientist will be replaced anytime soon. What I can see is a lot of things that the data scientist, a lot of basic things, basic tasks that the data scientist is doing uh, will probably be done automatically by tools. So a lot of the cleanup tasks, a lot of the auditing, a lot of things like this will probably be done and will help the data scientists. And basically we are going to shift a little bit on the number of things that the tools can do. But what the data scientist is doing today will stay there for a while. And what we need to replace data scientists is to take the brain down and to basically have a tool that is doing that. And even today, data scientists between them, they cannot do that. So.
Okay, that's very interesting. So I shouldn't be looking for a job then. Okay. So, Bert, do you have any advice for any really, I mean, I understand that big data as a whole is a really challenging space from a technical standpoint. I'm not saying that other sectors are not, but I'm saying that, you know, they're extremely capital intensive, they need a lot of talent, they need a lot of experience, and quite frankly, you know, even from Data Elite's perspective, we see a lot of founders in their mid-30s. You know, you need to have significant experience in order to be able to address these problems. So what is your advice for any really good engineers that want to start a big data company? Which sectors do you think they should go into? What is missing?
Yeah, I would go after healthcare.
Healthcare.
Affordable Care Act has changed the entire complexity of pay and how people get paid now for healthcare. It's dramatically changed. All of the large companies, Kaiser down the road here, United Healthcare, are struggling to understand how are they going to make money, because now you have to pay, you get paid by the outcome and the success of the health of the patient, and you can lose money now. You share a profit share with the government. It's such a different problem. And big data is just tied up in knots. I mean, it's the team earlier talked about genomics and personalized care that's mandated by this redirection of healthcare. And at the same time, you have, again, the clinical devices that now you have an obligation. Gee, if we're collecting all that data and we don't take action for a patient of ours, what's our liability on that? So to me, there's a huge opportunity in healthcare, the reimbursement side, and being able to dive into all of that complex data, pull it together, and be able to come up with answers to the questions that doctors need answers to today to treat people.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple more minutes. We're going to do some Q&A if you have any questions. Yeah, there's the microphone.
Big data computer overlords going to look more like the Cylons or Skynet?
Whoever wants to have a take on that? Jeff, what do you think?
I think it was Skynet.
Okay.
Thanks here for questions. Any questions? Big data? Big question? All right, okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, folks.